So why did Trump take out Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, and why now? The story is that Venezuela supplies drugs to the US and therefore we need to take them out to stop that, when the reality is that most of the drugs that enter the US come, nearly 90% of it comes from Colombia and Mexico, not Venezuela. Venezuela has certain things that the US wants, and we want to go into that. Something happened in April 2025 that has really changed the world order as we know it. International law, international rules, they don't exist anymore. It's the US dictating quite firmly what it wants and how it wants it, and other countries need to follow that. Organizations like the UN and other similar organizations that were created after World War II to ensure peace, to ensure that there's one rule, one law that allows countries to interact peacefully, where the basis of that is they're able to trade and access resources from each other instead of countries taking over resources by force. Well, Trump is breaking down all those organizations, intentionally doing so because he sees it as it's not in the interest of the US. And that was very evident when he applied his tariffs in April 2025. The major shock wasn't the tariff. I mean, the tariffs were a shock, but how China retaliated was even a bigger shock to the system and to the US especially. What turns out is that China has a big asset that the US needs, which is rare earth minerals. Rare earth minerals are those minerals that are used in a lot of technology, from defense to electronic vehicles to renewable energy. China controls, or the output of those minerals, 60% comes from China, and 90%, because those minerals have to be processed to create final products that can be used in devices and defense. 92% of that processing in the whole world is done in China. They also have 94% of very strong magnets being produced in China, which is needed in all types of defense and technology products. And China decided to stop exporting those rare earth minerals to other countries, including the US, as a retaliation to the tariffs being applied by the US. Now, whatever your views of the tariffs are, the point of this video is not to discuss the tariffs themselves, but what resulted from those tariffs and how that's connected to Venezuela and this new approach by the US. Now, the US really needs those rare earth minerals because one of its biggest assets, which is the reason why it really controls the whole world, other than its dollar reserve currency, is its defense industry, or war industry is probably a better label to that. They have the biggest military in the world, and bigger than the 7 countries combined in terms of spending especially. And not having access to those rare earth minerals obviously is an attack on its defense capabilities. And so in a way, they saw this control or restriction of exporting those rare earth minerals as an attack on the US, which completely changed their policy into a much more aggressive one. I mean, they were always aggressive, obviously, because they have been involved in a lot of wars: Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq, Syria, and many, many other countries. But this is a new way of dealing with the world, whereby Trump is basically saying, we don't care what agreements we entered into before, we're ripping that up and we're starting anew. We're starting fresh. We can dictate terms, which we were not dictating before, because in his words, the US was weak. It was looking at maybe win-win situations, where in Trump's world, there are no win-win situations. There's a loser and there's a winner. And the US is going to be the winner, and therefore the other countries are going to be the losers. You see that in a lot of the trade deals. A lot of the counterparties, including Europe, got the bad end of the deal. They're much worse off, and the US is much better off because no one can say anything to the US. I mean, one of the advantages of the US is obviously its defense, but also its consumer spending. It consumes a lot of products. It has a huge population that is very wealthy relative to other countries, and they're able to spend. They have spending power. So a lot of countries want access to the US, and for that access, the US is saying, hang on, we want better access to your people, economy, and industries. So we're going to change the whole game. Now, the US released a strategic paper that was very interesting that we're going to look into right now. So the US released their national security strategy in November 2025. And if you haven't read this, it's a good read about what is their strategy going forward for the protection of America. And in there, you could see, what do we want in and from the world? And over there, we want a hemisphere, especially the Western hemisphere, that remains free of hostile foreign incursion or ownership of key assets, and that supports critical supply chains. And we want to ensure our continued access to key strategic locations. In other words, we will assert and enforce a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. What it's saying is that there are assets in South America, in possibly even North America, that we want access to them, and we don't want any other country to have access to those strategic assets. It doesn't matter what the country wants, what the people want, we need those assets. And therefore, we're taking over those assets. Now, over here, there's a point about balance of power. The United States cannot allow any nation to become so dominant that it could threaten our interests. We will work with allies and partners to maintain global and regional balances of power to prevent the emergence of dominant adversaries. So it's not about just making America, the US, better. It's about stopping any other country from becoming the dominant power, taking a hit, obviously, at China. This is very interesting. This is about securing access to critical supply chains and materials. As Alexander Hamilton urged in our republic's earliest days, the United States must never be dependent on any outside power for core components, from raw materials to parts to finished products, necessary to the nation's defense or economy. This will require expanding American access to critical minerals and materials while countering predatory economic practices. Moreover, the intelligence community will monitor key supply chains and technologies and technological advances around the world to ensure we understand and mitigate vulnerabilities and threats to American security and prosperity. This is exactly what we were discussing before, which is we need access to critical minerals for our defense, and we're not going to rely on any other country anymore. They were before relying on China to process that. It's very interesting that the world allowed China to dominate that segment of critical minerals, rare earth minerals, to produce magnets, to produce components that are needed in defense, especially, and EVs and other products. We also want to have energy dominance, restoring American energy dominance in oil. Hello, Venezuela. And restoring the necessary key energy components is a top strategic prosperity. Cheap and abundant energy will produce well-paying jobs, reduce costs for American consumers and businesses, fuel reindustrialization, and help maintain our advantage in cutting-edge technologies such as AI. Now, AI is going to require a lot of energy for computing, and the route that China is taking is renewable energy. They are the number one in solar. They're going to be wind and other kind of energies that are focused on renewable energy. Of course, they use also carbon type of energy. But the US is taking a different approach of moving away from renewables and focusing on cheap oil and gas. Now, surprisingly, it's a coincidence that Venezuela has some oil, a lot of oil, in fact. It is the number one reserve of oil in the world. It has the most heavy oil located in Venezuela, right there, for the taking. Now, this is very interesting about the Western Hemisphere. After years of neglect, the United States will reassert and enforce the Monroe Doctrine. This is the Monroe Doctrine was essentially saying that Europe, you stow away from South America. No more colonial, entities in our backyard. South America's is where we are, and we are going to be the dominant player in that region. So Europe, you think about other places. We don't care what other places, just not kind of the Western Hemisphere of South America, North America. We will deny non-hemispheric competitors the ability to position forces or other threatening capabilities, or to own or control strategically vital assets in our hemisphere. Now, China and Russia were obviously key partners to Venezuela. So this is telling them that, China and Russia, that you guys don't get involved in our backyard. and maybe we'll also look the other way regarding your areas. Now, of course, for Russia, which was a key strategic partner to Venezuela, they might be a bit, they might lose influence and power in that region, but they're also looking at this and saying, God, we're now validated by what we did in Ukraine. Because can you imagine if Russia went into Ukraine and just took out Zelensky, just kidnapped him, the uproar that would happen? Well, the US just did that. Now, you might say, well, Maduro is a dictator. He destroyed the country. He tortured and killed a lot of his people, and there is support for taking him out. And I'm sure there is a lot of support for taking him out. But the U.S. didn't do this because of what Maduro did to his people. There has been many instances where the U.S. took out the democratically elected president to install a semi-dictator in place. I mean, they did that in Iran, for example, and other places. They've supported narco groups that were against the elected governments in South America because those governments didn't align with U.S. interests. So it's all about really interests and not about whether this is a morally good thing to do or not. Now, Venezuela has the biggest reserve of oil in the world, heavy oil, that the US can process and sell to the market, but it also has rare earth minerals. And this is also one of the reasons why Venezuela was chosen for the US to kind of, in a way, control. I mean, he said it himself, we're taking control. But what I find very interesting about how Trump does things is very different to how the US has done things previously. The US would engage in heavy conflict with other nations, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, other places. But what Trump likes to do is to go out very quickly, maximize damage in the way that they want without putting boots on the ground or without having the US go into a forever war again. They did that with Iran, where it was just one bomb, boom, or a couple bombs, one night, out. And what they did over here with Venezuela is just take out the leader and, interestingly, not leave a vacuum in that place. Because I think now they've learned the lesson of if you take out the whole government, which is what they did in Iraq, for example, there's going to be a vacuum and there's going to be a power struggle that will lead to a civil war. And what they're trying to do over here, which I'm assuming what Trump is trying to do, is try to bully Venezuela to accept the terms that the US wants, but without destroying the government completely and creating a civil war situation. They let the vice president become the president, and they're telling her basically that, look, if you don't accept what we want, we can just do a lot more. So it's this kind of strategic attacks that Trump seems to love. But this kind of breaks, if there was any question about international law, I mean, we knew that didn't exist with the Gaza-Israel conflict. But it is obvious now that the world order, as we know it, is very different to now how it's going to be going forward. It's kind of going back to before the end of World War II, which is countries were taking over other countries because they had strategic resources that they needed for them to become a superpower. And we mitigated that kind of need for countries to attack each other because we had trade, free trade, that we can access your resources, we'll trade things, what you need, we'll give you what you need, you'll give us what we need. And that's how we create peace times, because we don't have to resort to conflict, or these world war conflicts. But Trump is kind of moving away from that. And that became very evident with the whole tariffs and how China retaliated. Now, the next step for Trump would be to take over Greenland, which he's already said a couple times that he is going to do. And Europe can't do anything about it. I mean, Europe is clearly very, very weak, and they rely on the US for a lot of things, including security. And now that Russia is a threat to Europe, or is perceived as a big threat to Europe, they're just going to follow what the US wants. And if the US wants Greenland, they're just going to have to accept it. Now, they're going to have to pretend that it was a deal that was made, that Europe's going to get a lot for what the US is going to take, and kind of showcase that we're still one big happy family. But it's very clear that the Europeans are now looking at how can we rely less on the U.S. because we don't know who's going to lead the U.S. and we thought there's going to be a kind of a process or an order to things where that's why we entered into agreements. But that order can be flipped at any moment, as Trump has done, and therefore we have to defend ourselves, which I think is a great thing for Europe. They do need to rely less on the US, which means the US will have less soft power. But for Europe, that's a very important thing. I think what Trump did validates to some extent what Putin did with Ukraine because, it was the same thing. There was some threat to Russia. That's the kind of the Russia story around it is that we see Ukraine doing things that is a threat to Russia, and therefore we're going to ensure that this is our backyard, and therefore we're going to do what we need to do. I'm not supporting that. I'm just saying that's the kind of view that Russia had, and Trump, the U.S. just validated that point by attacking Venezuela and doing what pretty much Russia did, but in a slightly different way, obviously, by just taking out Maduro as a first step. I'm sure that Trump doesn't want to get involved in a war in Venezuela with boots. He's doing these kind of strategic hits, and that will continue. But with Greenland, there doesn't need to be any strategic hits. It's just we want this. It's ours. We're going to take it. And that's it. Love to know your comments about the New World Order, how things are changing, and where you see the world going from here. Is it more peace, or is it more war? Or is it more war, more peace through war? Thank you very much. And if you did like this, please subscribe and hit the like button. See you very soon.